Okay, today we're going to look at Lofink's section on the quest for the form of the people of God. In the introduction on page 106, he starts off by reminding us that Israel's faith is about the world. So it's not an otherworldly faith. It's not like, hey, we're looking to do our best here, and then when we die, and maybe in the afterlife things will be really go really well. It's not life is but a dream. No, the Israelite faith is about transforming the world, right? You think about Jesus, who was an Israelite, right? He was Jewish. How did he pray? Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. So we see here the roots of the Jewish faith. It's the idea that we transform this world into heaven, so to speak, right? We turn this world into the heavenly Jerusalem, as is talked about in the Apocalypse to John. So he asked, and so what form of society would best be able to express this reality, this community of free and loving persons, this community where people saw each other as friends, as family, and not as competition, right? The society in which people trusted God and therefore trusted one another instead of seeing people as threats to their own existence. He's going to go through the various forms that the people of God, the Israelites, have taken in their own narrative in the Torah. So, in other words, it's the stories that the Israelites tell about their own history that he uses to look at see the different forms they've taken as the people of God to help us understand what forms might be the best form for the people of God in the world today. So the first one that he looked at, and it's the one we're going to focus on in this video, is the people of God as a tribal society. Now remember, when the Israelites formed, they were a motley crew, a ragtag bunch of disparate tribes. They were dropouts, people who had abandoned or even rebelled against the oppressive conditions of the Canaanite city-states, and probably a group that had escaped from slavery in Egypt, along with other people who were not beneficiaries of the monarchical systems that oppress many for the good of the few. Lofink points out that when the Israelites first exist as this confederation of tribes in their early years, from about 1200 to 1000 BC, the very fact that they existed, and the very fact that they record this period in the Torah, shows something very revolutionary, right? He calls it simply revolutionary. And just the idea that you could be a people without having a king was the opposite of the ideas and the cultures of the city-states, which the earliest Israelites had escaped from. So as he puts it here on page 107, just the king, the idea of the king is a foundational story. It's the story of the origins and therefore the meaning of the state, of being a people for the Egyptians and the Canaanites. But the Israelites are not existing like that. They're basically denying that story and saying that the king is a primeval, part of the primeval order of creation, right? That without the king, the society is impossible. They're showing that's wrong, right? They're denying that, and by preserving that in their history and making it the foundational story one of the foundational stories of their histories, they're calling attention to it as a model that should take some exemplary attention. So he goes on here on page 108, explaining how it was deliberately a counter model. It was not like the Canaanite states where the king was somehow in cahoots with the gods and everyone else was working for them. It was not like Egypt where the Pharaoh was the incarnation of the sun god, and he was the reason for the state itself. In Egypt, everyday life, everything about the state was seen as dependent upon the Pharaoh. So worship of the gods was this worshiping the state, was worshiping this one person who had a privileged class. Well, the Israelites, they came from something quite different. What they went with instead, after escaping from the oppression of the monarchical state systems, was to form tribal alliances, right? Where each tribe did as much as they wanted to help the other tribes. It's voluntary. No one says you have to go do this. You have to participate in this harvest. You have to build this temple. You have to join this war. No, all these things would be voluntary. They would freely choose to join in common solidarity, right? And we see this when the Israelite tribes defended each other from foreign invaders. When other tribes who were not part of the Israelite alliance, who were not worshipers of Yahweh, right, would come and try to conquer part of the Israelite land, the other tribes would rally up voluntarily, not because a king came and said you had to. No, because they chose to participate in that. They chose to defend the rights of their neighbor. So Lofink identifies this as one of the forms of the people of God. And it seems to me he's leaning towards this form in his writing as his favorite. There'll be some more evidence of that later. Another point he makes of the way that the Israelites came together to defend the other tribes during this period, which comes to be known as the period of the Judges, was through the charismatic leadership of what the Israelites called judges. Now, a judge was not a person who sat on a bench and made a legal decision, but a judge was someone who would rally up people from the various tribes, not just their own tribe, but they could rally people to come defend parts of Israel from the other tribes. So they were what's known as charismatic leaders. Now, after they would rally up these armies, these volunteer armies, you would have farmers leaving their plows in the field saying, okay, I'm going to go over here and help defend this other tribe, because they knew if that tribe went down, well, gosh, who was next, right? And they felt a sense of obligation, right? Also, and they chose to defend their new society, the society in which they could have their own land, the society in which they were not beholden to a king, the society in which they looked out for each other and took care of each other. So this was part of it, that they go and fight to defend their brother and sister tribes against, right, other invaders, people who would not want to participate in this egalitarian society, right? They were fighting to keep the other tribes as part of the free people, right? So they would not be enslaved by people who did not follow this revelation. But after this happened, after they fought off the foreign invader, the judges did not rise to the level of king. They remained judges. So they were still respected. People would come and talk to them if they had disputes. If there was disputes among some other tribes, right, and they didn't know how to settle it, well, they'd go to Deborah, right, and they'd ask her, hey, how should we settle this? And she would be a judge in that way. She would help them settle their problems, but not a king. She couldn't tell them, you have to do this, you have to do that. Give me, a portion of your of the fruits of your fields. She couldn't conscript their sons and daughters into the army or into the service in the royal palaces. There were no palaces. What you had was a bunch of people who had chosen to be free, helping each other. And then these charismatic leaders, the judges, going around and rallying up volunteer armies when needed. One of them, Gideon, they wanted to make him king, but he refused. He said, "No, people, the Lord God alone is our king." Right? He remembered where they had come from. He did not forget, that they had escaped from the tyranny of kings. So Lofink has a pretty positive view of this form of the people of God as a tribal society. Why? Well, it fits his main criteria for being the people of God, right? So he says it's impressive that they're free and equal. This voluntariness, everything is voluntary. This is the opposite of slavery, right? And the equality. You see Yahweh here caring for all, not just a few privileged nobility or, the king, and then everybody else is just supposed to do what they want. There's no ruling class. There's no privileged class. What you have is a voluntary community of the various tribes. People choosing to come together to help each other, right? Now, problems. Were there problems with this model? Yeah, as we see in the story in Judges 19 to 21. Violence does break out, right? They did have some, in this case, all the tribes ended up punishing the tribe of Benjamin for some injustices that it had done to the Levite tribe. So we do have, they did have that problem with unity in that case. Also, lack of unified action. Sometimes he hints at it and is going to talk about it more in the next section when the Israelites do actually change into a nation state. But none of those judges were ever successful in getting all 12 tribes together on the same campaign. So we'll see in the next section when Israel is faced with the serious military machine of the Philistines, for example, with their iron weapons and well-organized professional army. The judges and the tribe and the tribal confederation is just not up to the task, right? And we'll see actually the people calling for a different kind of society. But overall, I think Lofink seems actually to favor this, the people of God as a tribal society, because of its freedom and the equality of members. And again, this is what he sees the whole being the people of God as, right? It's a free and loving society. A voluntary society of loving persons.